That voice, Mafia boss whispered as nurse sang, then fell to his knees beside his sister's bed. The 11th floor of St. Jude's private hospital was silent at 2 a.m. It was a silence bought and paid for, thick and sterile, broken only by the rhythmic, electronic sigh of machines that refused to give up. Luciano Barone sat in the dark, his chair angled toward the bed. He had not removed his jacket. The hand-stitched wool, worth more than the car the charge nurse drove, was a suit of armor, but it did nothing to stop the cold that lived in the room. His sister, Sophia, lay perfectly still, even in the antiseptic glow of the monitors. She was beautiful, 22 years old, her dark hair fanned out on the white pillow, her skin like porcelain, a small, blue-tinged bruise, the last visible remnant, remained on her temple. It was where her head had struck the pavement after the bullet meant for him had torn through her abdomen. 2 months. 62 days he had sat in this chair, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, a movement forced by a ventilator. Luciano was a man carved from granite. As the head of the Barona family, he was feared on every street, respected in rooms he never entered, and hated by men he'd put in the ground. But in this room, he was just a brother drowning in guilt. He had raised her, shielding her from the grit and blood of his world, only to have that world catch her in the crossfire. His failure was a physical weight, pressing the air from his lungs. He felt nothing. Numbness was his only defense. The beep of the heart monitor was the metronome of his vigil. Beep, beep, beep. Then the silence broke. It was not a machine. It was a voice. It slipped into the room not through the door, which was closed, but through the ventilation, or perhaps just through the thin, expensive walls. It was female, soft, and so full of a quiet, aching sadness it felt like a physical touch. A woman was singing. It was not a performance. It was a whisper set to music, an old melody he vaguely recognized, something his mother might have hummed. Luciano's head lifted, the numbness in his chest cracked. He frowned, irritated by the intrusion, yet his body, independent of his will, strained to hear it better. The voice was like warm honey, smoothing over the raw edges of his grief. It was impossibly vulnerable. He rose without making a sound, his large frame moving with a predator's silence. He pulled open the heavy door to his sister's suite, stepping into the dimly lit hallway. The singing was clearer here, coming from a room further down the corridor. Liana Carter checked the fluid level on the patient's IV drip, her movements practiced and automatic. She hated the night shift, but it paid 12% more, and 12% was the difference between keeping the lights on and another threatening letter from the landlord. Her anxiety was a low, constant hum, a vibration just beneath her skin. The only way to soothe it, the only way she'd ever known, was to sing. She did it unconsciously, a habit she'd never broken. While she worked, she hummed, and when she was alone with a sleeping patient, she let the words come. It was therapy. For them. The charge nurse had once said, but Liana knew the truth. It was for her. She wiped down the tray, her voice barely above a breath, singing the lullaby that had calmed her own nerves since she was a child. She was exhausted. Her scrubs were stiff. Her shoes a unique brand of torture, and she was terrified she'd miscalculated her aunt's medication budget. She didn't know the most dangerous man in the city was standing 30 feet away, listening. Luciano watched from the shadows. He saw a nurse. She was average, he supposed. Brown hair pulled back in a tight, functional bun, stray wisps framing a pale face. She looked tired. She looked small. But the sound that came from her was immense. It filled the hallway, a column of pure, unshielded emotion. He watched her gently adjust a sleeping man's blanket, her movements tender, her voice unwavering. He felt an unfamiliar tightness in his throat. This was not the sharp, professional polish of the other staff. This was raw. It was the sound of someone who had been hurt and was still standing. He realized with a jolt, the first thing that had made him feel anything other than rage or guilt in 62 days. He saw the head nurse, a heavy-set woman named Martha, exiting another room. Luciano stepped from the shadow. Martha jumped, her hand flying to her chest. "Mr. Barone, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Is everything all right with Sophia?" Luciano's voice was a low rasp, rough from disuse. "Who is that?" He nodded down the hall, where the singing had just tapered off as the nurse moved into another room. "Who, sir?" "The nurse. Singing." Martha's expression soured. "Oh, that's Liana Carter. I'm so sorry. Mr. Barone, this is her first week on the private wing. I've told her about the unprofessional noise. It will not happen again." Luciano stared at the nurse, his gaze unreadable. "Liana Carter," he repeated. It wasn't a question. He turned and went back into Sophia's room, the door clicking shut with heavy finality. The next day, Liana was called into the administrative offices 10 minutes before her shift. Unprofessional behavior? Liana stared at Helen Davis, the day shift supervisor, who peered at her over a pair of severe rectangular glasses. "A complaint was filed. Liana," Helen said, her tone clipped. "A very serious complaint from the VIP in Suite 304, the Barone family." Liana's stomach turned to ice. The Barone family. She didn't know the name, but she knew the type. The private wing was full of them. Men and women who walked through the world as if they owned it, demanding silence and perfection, treating the staff like furniture. The complaint was about singing. Mr. Barone is paying a catastrophic amount of money to ensure his sister has absolute peace. He's not paying to hear the staff practicing for a talent show. You're a good nurse, Liana, but this is a final warning. Any more complaints, and I'll have to move you back to the general surgical floor. Liana swallowed. The general floor meant a pay cut. A pay cut meant eviction. I understand. Good, don't let it happen again." Liana walked out of the office, humiliation burning in her cheeks. It wasn't just the warning. It was the violation. Her music, the one small private thing that got her through the night, had been called unprofessional noise, all because of some rich man in a suit who didn't like being disturbed. Rage, cold and sharp, replaced her fear. She saw him later that evening. He was standing in the hallway outside his sister's suite, speaking quietly to a doctor. He wore a dark gray suit that probably cost more than her last 6 months' rent. He was tall, built with a solid, imposing stillness. When the doctor left, he just stood there, staring at the closed door, his profile like something cut from stone. Liana's feet moved before her brain caught up. She marched down the hall, her worn-out sneakers squeaking on the polished linoleum. "Excuse me," she said. Luciano Barone turned slowly. Up close. He was even more intimidating. His eyes were dark, almost black, and held a coldness that went clear to the bone. He didn't speak. He just watched. "I'm Liana Carter," she said, her voice shaking slightly. But she held her ground. "The nurse you reported." His expression did not change. Not a flicker of recognition or apology. "I need you to know," she continued, her pulse hammering in her throat, "that I was not being unprofessional. I was singing to a patient who suffers from dementia. It calms him. Sometimes. It's the only thing that does. I am sorry if it disturbed you, but you have no right to threaten my job, a job I need, just because you're powerful enough to—" She was breathing hard. Her entire body braced for him to yell, to call security, to have her fired on the spot. Luciano looked at her. He truly looked at her. He saw the fire in her tired, hazel eyes, the flush of defiance on her pale cheeks. He saw the way her small hands were clenched into fists at her sides. She was terrified of him, and she was confronting him anyway. No one spoke to Luciano Barone this way. No one. A slow, almost imperceptible change happened to his face. The corner of his mouth twitched, the barest hint of a smirk. It was not kind. It was calculating. He was struck, not by her words, but by her sheer, suicidal boldness. He said nothing. He simply held her gaze, the silence stretching until it became a heavy, suffocating blanket. Liana's defiance began to crumble under the weight of his stare, turning back into fear. She felt like a mouse yelling at an eagle, finally, feeling small and stupid. She broke eye contact. "Forget it," she muttered, and turned. walking away as fast as she could without running. She fled to the staff break room, her heart pounding. Maria, another night nurse, was there, scrolling through her phone. "Whoa, Liana, you look like you just saw a ghost," Maria said, looking up. "Worse," Liana breathed, sinking into a plastic chair. "I just confronted the VIP in 304. Maria's eyes went wide. "The scary one? The one they call Mr. Barone? Are you crazy? They say he owns half the city." "He got me written up," Liana said, the anger returning. "For singing. He called it noise." "Honey, why do you even do that? Just keep your head down, get the paycheck." It's not just doing it," Liana said, the frustration welling up. It was supposed to be my life." Maria softened. "What do you mean?" Liana rarely, if ever, spoke about it. It was a door she kept triple locked, but the confrontation, the write-up, the sheer exhaustion, it all broke the lock. "I used to study music," Liana whispered, staring at her hands. "Conservatory level. I was going to be a music therapist. Maybe even sing professionally." "What happened?" Liana's face closed. The memory was sharp. "Physical. A man happened. My ex, Adam." She took a shaky breath. "He was charming. Everyone loved him, until they were alone with him. He said he loved my voice. Then he started telling me who I could sing for, then where I could sing. Then he told me I was no good, that I was embarrassing him." She traced the rim of her coffee cup. "The night of my senior recital, he got drunk. He told me I was singing for other men. He got violent. He destroyed my apartment. He broke my keyboard. He grabbed my throat and told me if he couldn't have my voice, no one could." Maria was silent. "I testified," Liana continued, her voice flat. "But he was smooth. He had a good lawyer. The case collapsed. I dropped out of school. I couldn't sing, not even in the shower, for almost a year. I moved here, changed my name slightly, started nursing school. It was practical. It was safe." She looked at Maria, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Singing in the halls. It was the first time in 5 years I felt like myself again, and now that rich bastard just took it away." That night, Luciano sat in his usual chair. The room was colder, the silence heavier. He found himself listening, waiting. The numbness had returned, but now it felt incomplete. He had been intrigued by her nerve. He had his team run her name before he'd even sat down. The report that came back was thin. Liana Carter, 28, graduated from a community nursing program. No family, except a disabled aunt in a state-run facility in the Bronx. No assets, no social media. A mountain of student and medical debt. She lived in a rundown apartment that was one step above a slum. She was, by his world standards, a ghost, a non-entity. And she had looked him in the eye and accused him. Just after midnight, he heard it again. It was different this time. He moved to the door and cracked it open. She was in the hallway, pushing a linen cart. She wasn't singing words, just humming a melody. It was quieter, more hesitant, broken. She was afraid. He had done that. He had taken that fire he saw in her eyes and dampened it. A strange, protective instinct warred with his annoyance. He had filed the complaint, not to be cruel, but because the sound she made, it was his. He'd heard it first. It had broken his isolation, and he didn't want it wasted on demented old men. He wanted it for Sophia. He watched her push the cart past his door, her shoulders slumped in defeat, and for the first time since his sister's eyes had closed, Luciano Barone's face softened. The mask of the mafia boss, the cold grief of the brother, it all fell away for a fraction of a second, leaving only a man, mesmerized by a broken lullaby. 2 nights later, Liana stumbled up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, her legs aching. The elevator had been broken for a week. The hallway smelled like stale curry and damp. She was bone-tired, running on 4 hours of sleep and the dregs of a cold cup of coffee. She fumbled for her keys, her fingers clumsy. She just wanted to lock the door, shower, and fall into bed. When she reached for the lock, her fingers brushed a piece of paper. It was jammed in the door frame, right at eye level, a folded piece of cheap notebook paper. Her blood went cold. She never got mail this way. Never. Her stomach clenched. With trembling hands, she pulled it free. She unfolded it. There were only a few words, written in a heavy, sloping cursive she recognized instantly. A handwriting that had haunted her nightmares for 5 years. Heard you're still singing. Little bird, I'm back in town. Liana's keys slipped from her numb fingers, clattering loudly on the worn linoleum floor. She couldn't breathe. Her legs gave out, and she slid down the peeling paint of the door, the note crushed in her hand. He was back. Adam was back. Less than an hour after Liana Carter slid to the floor, her back against her own apartment door, Luciano Barone was looking at a photograph of the note she still held crushed in her hand. He sat in his office, a soundproofed room miles from the hospital, encased in dark wood and old money. The phone call had been brief. The ex showed, his man, Nico, said Nico was new, efficient and invisible, planted in the building across the street 3 days ago. He didn't go in, just left something in her door. She found it about 20 minutes ago, has not moved since. The note? Luciano's voice was low, bored. It was a dangerous sound. My guy in the building got a shot of it before she did. Reads, heard you're still singing. Little bird, I'm back in town. Eh? Luciano's hand, which had been resting on the desk, closed slowly into a fist. The background check he had run after her little display of courage in the hallway had been thorough. A was Adam. An ex-boyfriend with a collapsed assault charge and a restraining order he'd violated twice. A ghost from her past. Luciano looked across the room. At nothing. The girl's voice, that aching, vulnerable sound, had been a crack of light in the suffocating darkness of Sophia's room. He had told himself he was protecting a medical necessity. Doctor. Weiss. Sophia's neurologist had reviewed the charts and confirmed that during the moments of Liana's singing, Sophia's neural activity showed faint, organized spikes. A positive stimulus. The doctor had called it. Luciano called it leverage against God. This Adam, a worthless street-level shadow, threatening to disrupt the first positive stimulus in 2 months. She is not to be compromised, Luciano said. The words were cold, final. I want 2 men on her, close. I want to know when he breathes in her direction. But she doesn't see you. Nobody sees you. Understood? Understood, boss. Luciano hung up. He leaned his head back, the leather of his chair groaning softly. He was doing this for Sophia. Of course he was. He was protecting the only thing that seemed to reach his sister. It had nothing to do with the defiant flash in Liana's hazel eyes, or the way his entire body had tensed when she'd confronted him. Smelling faintly of antiseptic soap and fear. It was, he assured himself, for Sophia. Liana lived in a fog of terror for the next 3 days. She went to work. She came home. She triple-checked the flimsy lock on her door. She didn't sing. She didn't hum. She barely spoke. The joy she had slowly rediscovered in the hospital corridors was gone, poisoned by the memory of Adam's handwriting. She was just a woman in scrubs, hiding again on the 4th night. She dragged herself into the 11th floor staff lounge, her head pounding from lack of sleep, and she smelled them. On the worn Formica counter, where there was usually just a sad array of sugar packets, sat an elegant, minimalist glass vase. In it were 3 white orchids, their petals perfect and stark. A small, heavy stock card was propped against the glass. Her name, Liana, was written on the front in a strong, clean script. She opened it. Keep singing. There was no signature. Liana's heart did a painful, lurching jump. She looked around the empty lounge. Her first thought was Adam. Was this a new, sick game? No, the handwriting was wrong. Adam's was a lazy, arrogant scrawl. This was precise. A patient's family, then? Mrs. Petrov, in room 309, had smiled when Liana hummed. She was still staring at the card, a confusing mix of fear and something else, warring in her chest, when she felt it, the prickle on her skin, the sensation of being watched. Slowly. She looked out the lounge doorway, down the hall toward the private suites. He was there. Luciano Barone stood in the shadow of the alcove outside his sister's room. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking directly at her. He made no pretense of doing otherwise. He wasn't angry, as he had been when he'd filed the complaint. He wasn't smirking, as he had when she'd confronted him. He was just watching, intense, possessive, and absolute. It was him. The complaint, the flowers, the note, it was all him. That night, the anger that had been smothered by her fear of Adam came roaring back to life, redirected. She waited until 1 a.m, when the floor was at its quietest. She found him in the same spot, a silent sentinel in a $1,000 suit. She walked straight up to him. He was taller up close, a wall of dark wool and muscle. "Stop it," she said. Her voice was low, but it trembled. Luciano raised one dark eyebrow. He said nothing. "The flowers, the notes, the staring. I don't know who you think you are, but I am not one of your projects. I'm not here for you. I'm trying to do my job." "You haven't been," he replied. His voice was a low rasp that vibrated in the quiet hall. "You haven't been singing." It was a statement of fact, but it sounded like an accusation. "You're the one who complained," she hissed, trying to keep her voice down. "You're the one who called it unprofessional noise. You can't have it both ways." "I was wrong," he said. The admission seemed to cost him nothing. He stepped slightly out of the shadow, the low light catching the hard planes of his face. "I was distracted. I didn't understand what it was." "And what is it?" she demanded, exasperated. "What do you want from me? You want a private concert? You want me fired? I don't understand you." He looked at her, and for a second, the cold, impenetrable mask of the VIP cracked. His eyes traced her face, lingering on her mouth, then meeting her gaze with a force that made her want to step back. "I don't understand it either," he said, his voice dropping, becoming rougher. "I sat in that room for 2 months, in the silence, and it was nothing, just the machines. Then I heard you." He took a small, almost imperceptible breath. "Your voice. It woke something in me." Liana's throat went dry. All the fight drained out of her, replaced by a profound, staggering confusion. Adam had used her voice as a weapon against her. He'd called it shrill, annoying, too loud. He'd told her to shut up more times than he'd told her he loved her. No one, not even her professors at the conservatory, had ever spoken about her music like this. Not as something beautiful or technical, but as something vital, something that could wake a person. He was looking at her as if she were the only thing in the hallway, as if she were the only thing in the entire hospital. She was terrified of him. But in that moment, she was also moved. I have to go," she whispered, breaking the stare first. "I have patience." She walked away, her legs unsteady. She didn't look back, but she felt his eyes on her until she turned the corner. Luciano watched her go. He turned back to his sister's door, his jaw tight. He had said too much. He had exposed a part of himself he hadn't known existed. He didn't like it. He didn't like this pull, this need. He took out his phone and made a different call. It was to his financial advisor. 2 days later, Liana got a call from the director of her aunt's assisted living facility. "Liana, my dear, it's wonderful news," the woman gushed. "It's a miracle. A new philanthropic foundation, the Sophia's Wish Foundation, has reviewed your aunt's case. They are covering her entire medical balance, retroactively, and," the woman's voice almost squeaked, "they're moving her to a private suite at the Silver Crest. It's the best care in the state." Liana sat down on her apartment floor, the phone pressed to her ear. Silver Crest, that was where billionaires went. But why? Who are they? "It's all anonymous, dear. They just said they were moved by her case. The papers are already signed. She's being transferred this afternoon." Liana hung up, her mind reeling. Sophia's Wish. Sophia? His sister's name was Sophia. She felt sick. This was a man who didn't just buy flowers. He bought medical debt. He bought people. She was still trying to process this violation, this terrifying generosity, when her shift ended the next night. She walked home in the pre-dawn chill. her thoughts consumed by Luciano Barone. She was so lost in her head, she didn't hear the footsteps behind her until it was too late. "You've been hard to find. Liana," that voice. The charming, smooth baritone that had once wooed her, then threatened her. She froze. Adam. He stepped out from the alcove by her building's entrance, blocking her path. The streetlight was out, but she could see the familiar, handsome smile. It didn't reach his eyes. Or should I say, "Little bird, you didn't like my note." "Adam, please," she said, her voice a tiny, breathless thing. She tried to step around him. He grabbed her wrist, his grip like a steel trap. "Not so fast. I hear you're running with a new crowd, a rich crowd. You think you're better than me now? You're hurting me." The panic was a cold stone in her stomach. "You don't know what hurt is," he sneered, pulling her closer. "You're singing for him, the way you used to sing for me? Let go of me," she cried, pulling back. She stumbled, her free hand scraping against the building's rough brick facade. "You're mine. Liana, your voice is mine. You're not—" A black sedan, one without markings, rounded the corner and stopped. It didn't slow down, it just stopped. Two men in dark suits emerged. They moved with an economy of motion that was far more terrifying than any street thug. "We suggest you let the lady go," the first man said, his voice calm, polite. Adam laughed. "Who the hell are you? Her new bodyguards? Piss off. This is private." The first man sighed. The second man moved. It was appallingly fast. He didn't throw a punch. He grabbed Adam's arm, the one holding Liana, and twisted. There was a sound, a wet, hollow pop. Adam screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure agony, and his hand flew open. Liana scrambled away, falling against the wall. Just as quickly, a second car, a dark, gleaming Bentley, pulled up behind the first. Luciano Barone got out of the back seat. He didn't even look at Adam, who was now on his knees, clutching his ruined shoulder. Luciano's eyes were only for Liana. He saw her, pale and trembling, pressed against the brick, blood welling on her scraped hand. A look of cold, Arctic fury settled on his features. "Get in the car, Liana," he said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the night. "What? Who? I'm not—" she stammered. He walked toward her, ignoring his men as they efficiently disabled Adam, who was now weeping in pain. Luciano stopped in front of her. "He will never touch you again," he said. It was a vow. "Get in the car." He took her arm, not the one Adam had grabbed, but her good one, and steered her into the warm, leather-scented darkness of the Bentley. The drive was silent. Liana vibrated with shock, her scraped hand wrapped in a silk handkerchief he'd pressed into it. They didn't go to the hospital. They didn't go to her apartment. They drove to a high-rise, took a private elevator to the penthouse, and stepped into a vast, empty apartment made of glass and steel. The moment the door closed, the adrenaline gave way to rage. "You had me followed," she shrieked, rounding on him. "You knew he was there. You let him touch me." "He is handled," Luciano said, his face impassive as he removed his jacket. "Handled? You call that handled? That was violence. Who are you?" "I'm the man who just saved your life," he said, his voice still too calm. "I don't want to be saved by you," she yelled. "I don't want your flowers. I don't want your money paying my aunt's bills. And I don't want your men breaking people's arms. I want you to leave me alone." She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. He just watched her. "Are you finished?" he asked. "No," she said, but she was shaking again, the fight draining out of her. He stepped closer, and his eyes softened. "You're bleeding," he said. He gently took her injured hand. She tried to pull away, but his grip was firm. He led her into a bathroom that was bigger than her entire apartment and sat her on the cold marble counter. He said nothing, just opened a cabinet and pulled out a first aid kit. His movements were methodical, precise. He cleaned the scrapes on her palm with an antiseptic wipe. It stung, and Liana hissed, but his touch was shockingly gentle. His large, dark hands, which she knew could command such violence, were now impossibly careful. She watched him, her anger dissolving into a confusing, terrifying awareness of him, the smell of his cologne, something dark and like old spices, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. the sheer, solid presence of him. He finished bandaging her hand, but he didn't let go. His thumb brushed slowly over the inside of her wrist, right over her pulse. It was the most intimate touch she'd ever felt. She stopped breathing, and he looked up, his dark eyes locking with hers. He was so close. She could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the deep, exhausted lines around his eyes. His gaze dropped. It fell to her mouth. Liana's lips parted on a breath she didn't know she was holding. He leaned in. It was slow, inevitable. He was going to kiss her, and she knew, in that heart-stopping second, that she was going to let him. He stopped, barely an inch away. She could feel the warmth of his breath. He closed his eyes, a flicker of something, pain, guilt, passing over his face, and then he pulled back. He stood up to his full height, the moment broken. The tension in the room was so thick it was hard to breathe. "You're safe here," he said, his voice rough. "No one will find you. Sleep." He walked out of the bathroom. Liana sat there for a long time, staring at the white bandage on her hand. When she finally came out, he was sitting in an armchair by the glass wall, a phone to his ear, staring down at the city lights. He had given her a blanket and a bottle of water. The couch was long, soft, and looked like it cost a fortune. Liana didn't have the strength to argue or the courage to go back to her own apartment. She was too scared to be alone and too confused to leave. She lay down on the couch and pulled the cashmere blanket to her chin. The adrenaline crash was total. She was asleep in less than a minute. Luciano finished his call and turned his chair. He watched her sleep. Her face, in the dim light of the city, was pale and vulnerable, her breath catching in small, troubled sighs. He felt a surge of desire so potent it nearly brought him to his feet. He wanted to go to her, to lie beside her, to put his body between her and the world. But it was followed by a wave of guilt so cold it froze him in his chair. He was the man his father had raised him to be, a monster who lived in the dark, and she was the one who sang to the dying. He had brought her here to protect her. But he knew, as he watched the rise and fall of her chest, that he was the most dangerous thing in the room. Liana woke to the sharp, unfamiliar scent of lemons and the blinding white of morning sunlight reflecting off a glass wall. She was on the couch, tangled in a cashmere blanket that was softer than anything she had ever touched. Her body ached, a deep, weary soreness, and her hand, the one Luciano had bandaged, throbbed with a dull pulse. The penthouse was silent. He was gone. For a moment, she was completely untethered, floating in a reality she didn't recognize. The violence of the night before, Adam's sneer, the wet pop of his shoulder. Luciano's cold fury crashed over her. She sat up, her head spinning. On the massive marble island in the open kitchen, a tray was set. A single cup of black coffee, still steaming, a plate of toast, a small bowl of fruit. Beside it, a piece of heavy, cream-colored paper, folded once. It was not a cheap piece of notebook paper. This was heavy, expensive cardstock. She opened it, the same strong, clean script as the note with the orchids. "You're safe here." The words were meant to be a comfort. They were a cage. She was safe, because he had made her safe. He had used the casual, brutal violence of his world to clear a path, and then offered her coffee. She drank the coffee. It was bitter and strong and brought her sharply back to herself, but she couldn't touch the food. The note felt like a brand, a claim. "You're safe here" was only a half step away from "you're mine here." She looked at her bandaged hand. She thought of Adam. The flashback rose up and swallowed her whole, triggered by the exact thing she had just experienced. A powerful man making decisions for her safety. Adam had been a musician, too. A guitarist with a voice that charmed and hands that promised the world. He had found her in the conservatory practice rooms, and at first, their life was a symphony. He loved her voice. He adored it. He called her his muse, his songbird. The love turned to criticism, slow and insidious. "Don't sing that piece. It's too sharp for your range. Why are you practicing so late? Who are you trying to impress? That professor. He looks at you too much when you perform. You should drop his class." He began to curate her talent, then to contain it. He didn't like her singing for anyone but him. He didn't like her friends. He didn't like her clothes. He chipped away at her confidence, isolating her until his was the only voice she heard, and his voice, once so loving, turned sour. The night of her senior recital, the one that determined her scholarships. She had pushed back. She was going to sing. She had told him, whether he liked it or not. He had waited for her in her small apartment. He was drunk. He had told her she was a whore, using her voice to seduce other men. When she tried to walk past him, he grabbed her. When she fought back, he showed her what he was really made of. He hadn't just hit her. He had gone for the source of her defiance. He had smashed her keyboard. He had torn up her sheet music. And when she screamed, he had clamped his hand over her mouth, then wrapped his fingers around her throat, squeezing until black spots danced in her eyes. "If I can't have it," he had rasped, his handsome face purple with rage. "No one will." She had testified. She sat in a cold courtroom, her throat still bruised, and told her story. He sat across from her, clean-shaven in a borrowed suit, looking remorseful. His lawyer painted her as a hysterical, emotional music student prone to drama. It was her word against his charm against her trauma. The case collapsed for lack of evidence. The restraining order was paper. Liana dropped out of the conservatory 2 weeks later. She couldn't sing. She couldn't even listen to the radio. The sound of a perfect fifth made her want to vomit. She fled, changed her name from Anna to Liana, and enrolled in nursing school. Nursing was practical. It was anonymous. It was silent. And now, Luciano Barone, a man who radiated a power that made Adam look like a child, had sent her a note. Keep singing. She had to get out. She had to get to work. Work was real. She found her scrubs, still smelling faintly of the hospital. She let herself out of the penthouse. The elevator descended in absolute silence. No one stopped her. When she got to the hospital, she expected to be fired, or worse, to be treated differently, but everything was normal. The day shift was ending. The night shift was clocking in. Maria gave her a tired wave. The normalcy was more unsettling than a confrontation. She was halfway through her rounds, her anxiety a low, buzzing wire. When he found her, he wasn't in the hall this time. He was standing at the nurse's station, as if he belonged there, speaking quietly with Dr. Weiss. Dr. Weiss. Sophia's neurologist turned to Liana as she approached. "Ah, Nurse Carter, Mr. Barone was just telling me about your alternative therapy." Liana flushed. "Sir, he's very interested in your methods." "Doctor," Weiss continued, a small, curious smile on his face. "In fact, he's requested you perform them again, in a more controlled setting." Luciano watched her, his dark eyes unreadable. His gaze flicked to her bandaged hand. "Liana," he said. It was the first time he'd used her name. It sounded different in his mouth. Possessive. "My sister. I want you to sing for her." She looked from the doctor to the mafia boss. This was not a request. I'm not a therapist, sir. I hum, doctor." "Weiss has noted neural spikes correlating to your presence," Luciano said, ignoring her protest. "He will be observing to see if the stimulus is repeatable." This was a test, and she was the lab rat. She wanted to say no. She wanted to throw the story of Adam in his face and tell him what happened to songbirds when men tried to cage them. But then she looked past him, through the window of Suite 304, and saw the shape of the girl on the bed, a girl who was a victim, a girl whose brother, for all his terrifying power, was just a man, lost and grieving. "Okay," Liana whispered. "Okay, for her." She walked into the room. It smelled like sterile sheets and lavender lotion. Luciano followed, standing in the corner by the window, a statue of dark-suited grief. Doctor. Weiss stood by the monitors, his eyes on the readouts. Liana stood by Sophia's bed. The girl was beautiful, like a sleeping princess in a tragic story. Liana felt a profound, aching sorrow for her. "What should I sing?" she asked the room. "Whatever you sang that first night." Luciano's voice came from the shadow. Liana took a shaky breath. She closed her eyes, shutting out the machines, the doctor, and the dangerous man in the corner. She thought of the fear she felt. She thought of Adam. and she thought of this girl, trapped in the silence. She began to sing. It was an old Italian lullaby, one her grandmother had taught her, Ninna Nana, Ninna O. Her voice was hesitant at first, thin and reedy, but as she focused on Sophia, it strengthened, filling the room. She sang of stars and slumber, of a love that keeps watch through the night. The melody was simple, aching, and pure. She sang for a full minute. The only sound was her voice and the rhythmic sigh of the ventilator. "Look at that, Doctor," Weiss breathed. Liana stopped, her voice cutting off. She opened her eyes. The doctor was pointing to the EEG monitor. A series of green lines, usually a slow, lazy wave, was fluttering. It was organized, spiking in time with the cadence of her song. It's a strong, consistent neural stimulus. "Doctor," Weiss said, excitement in his voice. "Her brain is reacting. It's trying to follow the music." Luciano moved from the window, his eyes locked on the screen. He looked at Liana, and his expression was one of raw, unguarded hope. "Sing it again," he commanded, his voice rough. Liana sang it again. The lines danced. "Doctor." Weiss left a few minutes later, muttering about new protocols. Liana was wiping her eyes, emotionally drained. Luciano hadn't moved. He was just staring at his sister. "I need to get back to my rounds," Liana said quietly. She was almost at the door when he spoke. "They were killed. My parents." Liana stopped, her hand on the door. She turned. He was still looking at Sophia, his back to Liana. "I was 19, he said, his voice flat, as if reading a report. "Sophia was 7. They were shot in their car. A business dispute. I pulled her from the wreckage. She didn't cry, not for 3 days. I had to take over. The family, the business, everything." He finally turned to look at Liana. The coldness was gone. In its place was a chasm of guilt so deep it threatened to pull her in. "I raised her," he whispered. "I tried to keep her clean, away from this. I built a wall around her. I gave her everything, and she was good. She was so good, Liana. She was the only good thing." He walked closer, his gaze so intense it burned. "The men who shot her, they were trying to kidnap her, to get to me. The bullet that hit her. It had my name on it. I built a wall, and I was the one who let the wolves in. I failed her." Liana had never seen a man so powerful look so utterly broken. She forgot to be scared of him. She only saw the grief. "You haven't failed her," Liana said, her voice soft. "You're still here. And she's still here. She's fighting. Your voice," he said, struggling with the words. "It's the first thing that's reached her. It's the first hope. I need you to keep doing it." The intimacy of the confession settled between them, heavy and dangerous. Liana's fear of him was becoming hopelessly tangled with a deep, unwanted empathy. This feeling terrified her more than Adam ever had. She saw him again the next night and the next. She would sing for Sophia. The monitors would dance, and Luciano would watch, the hard lines of his face softening for those few minutes. But Liana felt the shift. His protection was closing in. He had her apartment building under surveillance. A car followed her to and from work. When she went to the cafeteria, a man she'd never seen before, in a suit, was suddenly in line behind her. She felt like she was suffocating. She finally cornered him in the hallway, late at night, after singing for Sophia. "You have to stop," she said, her voice low and shaking. "Stop what? Your men. They're everywhere. You paid my aunt's medical bills. You moved her without asking me. You're controlling my life. I'm protecting my sister's stimulus," he said. But it was a weak excuse. "No," Liana said, shaking her head. "This isn't about Sophia. Not anymore. This is about you. Men like you. You get what you want. You see something, you buy it, you protect it, you own it. I am not something to be owned. Mr. Barone?" The words hung in the air, sharp and painful, echoing her past. Luciano looked at her, and she saw a flash of surprise, as if she had struck him. He took a step closer. She held her ground. He studied her face, the defiance in her jaw, the fear in her eyes that she was trying so hard to hide. "No," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You're not. But you are someone I'll protect. I don't want your protection. You needed it 2 nights ago," he stated, his voice turning to ice. "Or would you have preferred I left you with him?" She flinched. He was right, and that was the most terrifying part. I have to go," she stammered, turning to leave. "Liana," she stopped. He was beside her. He reached out and, before she could react, he took her hand, not the bandaged one, the other. He lifted it, his eyes never leaving hers, and he pressed his lips to the back of her knuckles. It was a courtly, old-world gesture that felt impossibly intimate. Liana gasped and tried to pull her hand away. The touch was a shock, a brand. Her resistance seemed to trigger something in him. As she pulled back, his other hand came up, fast and sure, and he cupped her face. She froze. His palm was warm, his fingers firm, thumb resting on the sharp line of her cheekbone. He was not hurting her. He was holding her, possessing her. "Don't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I have to." He breathed. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to run, but she was pinned by his gaze, by his touch. His lips met hers. It was not a violent kiss. It was not the hungry, bruising kiss of a man like Adam. It was slow. It was restrained. It was a kiss of profound, agonizing need. It was a drowning man taking his first breath. His lips were firm, tasting of coffee and a desperation he held tightly in check. He didn't force her. He simply claimed. He brushed his mouth over hers, a test, a question, and then pressed, just once, with a quiet intensity that stole the air from her lungs. He held her there for a beat, 2, 3. Then he pulled back, just enough to look at her. His eyes were dark, his pupils blown wide. Liana was breathless. Her entire world had tilted on its axis. She was confused, terrified, and somewhere deep inside, undeniably, thrillingly alive. She stumbled back, pulling her face from his hand. She couldn't find her voice. She just stared at him, her lips tingling, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then she turned and fled down the hallway, her sneakers silent on the polished floor. She didn't stop until she was locked in the staff changing room, her back pressed against the cold metal lockers, her fingers pressed to her mouth. She could still feel him. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Miles away, in the back room of a rival family's restaurant, a different kind of meeting was taking place. "He's vulnerable," a man said, sliding a grainy photograph across the table. "He's moved his best men, not to protect the sister. They're following a civilian." The head of the Romano cartel picked up the photo. It was a long-lens shot of Liana, walking into her apartment building. "Who is she?" Romano asked, his voice like gravel. "A nurse. At the hospital. Her name is Liana Carter." Romano smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Luciano Barone. After all these years, he finally has a weak spot. "Forget the comatose sister. The girl is the leverage. Find out everything she loves, then we take it." Liana tried to build a wall. For 3 days after the kiss in the hallway, she avoided the 11th floor as much as she could, trading shifts, taking the long route to the break room. She needed distance. She needed to think. But the memory of his mouth on hers, that restrained, desperate press, was a brand. It had not been the brutal claiming of Adam. It had been something far more dangerous, a plea. She was back in her own apartment, a space that now felt flimsy and unsafe. She knew Luciano's men were outside. She had seen the same dark gray sedan parked across the street for 2 nights running. She was a prisoner of his protection, and the kiss had felt like the locking of the cage. She was trying to scrub the terror and confusion out of her mind by scrubbing her tiny kitchen grout when the knock came. It was not a light knock. It was 2 heavy, solid raps on the wood. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She thought of Adam. She thought of the note. "Liana." His voice. It came through the door, a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. She squeezed her eyes shut. She did not want to see him. She did not want to feel that pull. "Go away," she said, her voice weak. The lock on her door, the one she had triple-checked, made a sharp metallic click. Then the door opened. Luciano Barone stood in the entryway. He was not in one of his immaculate suits. He wore dark trousers and a black, high-collared knit shirt that made him look less like a boss and more like a shadow. In his arms, he held 2 large paper grocery bags. "This lock is worthless," he said. Not as a criticism, but as a fact. He stepped inside, brushing past her into the tiny kitchen. "I'll have it replaced tomorrow." "You can't just break into my apartment," she cried, following him. "I didn't break. I picked it," he said, placing the bags on her small counter. He began unloading them: milk, eggs, a loaf of fresh bread, cheese, vegetables, and 2 containers of what smelled like fresh pasta from the restaurant he owned. "You haven't been eating." It was the same tone he'd used about her singing, a simple statement of fact. "You can't be here," she said, her hands clenching at her sides. "You can't just show up with groceries. I am not your responsibility." "No," he agreed, turning to face her. "He was too large for the kitchen. He was too large for her entire life. But you're skipping shifts. You look tired, and you are under my protection. That makes this my responsibility." "Protection," she scoffed, the word tasting like acid. "Or control." Before he could answer, the world outside the window went white. A deafening crack of thunder shook the building, and the sky opened. The rain did not fall. It attacked, hammering against the thin glass. Luciano just looked at her. "The storm is here." As if summoned by his words, Liana's single overhead light flickered once, twice, and died. The apartment was plunged into a sudden, thick darkness, the only sound the roar of the rain and her own sharp intake of breath. "Stay still," his voice commanded from the blackness. She heard a soft rustle, the scratch of a match. A small flame bloomed, and he lit a stubby candle that had been sitting on her windowsill. In the flickering, warm light, his face was all shadows and sharp angles. He looked less like a man and more like something ancient. I have more candles," she whispered, her anger muted by the sudden intimacy of the blackout. They shared the food he had brought, sitting on her worn rug, the containers balanced on her coffee table. The candlelight softened the tension, the roar of the rain isolating them from the world. They ate in silence for a few minutes. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked, the question she had been holding for weeks. "Doing what?" "This." She gestured around the room. "The protection, the groceries, my aunt's bills, the kiss. Why me? You could have any nurse. You could hire the best music therapists in the world for your sister." Luciano set his fork down. He stared into the small flame, his expression unreadable. "They wouldn't be you. Their voices, they would be trained. They wouldn't have what yours has." "What? What does it have?" He looked at her, and his gaze was so heavy she felt it like a physical weight. "Damage, the same as mine." The confession hung in the air. Liana's throat felt tight. "You talk about my damage," she said, finding her courage in the dark. "What about yours? You sit in that hospital, you run whatever it is you run, you have all this power, but you're alone." She took a breath. "Why have you never married, Luciano?" He did not flinch. He did not look away. He seemed to be weighing the question and the cost of answering it. "My world. The one I was born into. It's not kind to women," he said, his voice a low rasp. "My father, he loved my mother, and his enemies used that. They targeted her. They targeted me. Love is a liability. Liana, it's a target you paint on your own back and on the back of the person you love. I would not do that to anyone. So you just feel nothing?" "I felt nothing," he corrected. "It was safer. I was too dangerous to love anyone. It was a simple rule." He leaned in slightly, the candle flame catching the deep, dark intensity in his eyes. "Until now." The air left her lungs. Until now. He was saying she was the exception. He was saying he was breaking his one rule. For her, the rain hammered the glass, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of his confession. Liana was trembling. She wasn't sure if it was cold, or fear, or something else entirely. "I'm scared of you," she whispered. "I know," he said. I don't know what you want from me." I want you to be safe, he said, and I want you to sing. He reached out, not to her hand, but to her face. He didn't cup it, as he had in the hospital. He just brushed the stray hairs from her temple, his thumb grazing her skin. The touch was feather-light, but it seared her. I should not have kissed you, he murmured. It was a mistake. It complicates things. Yes, she agreed, her voice barely audible. But I am going to do it again. He didn't lunge. He moved with a slow, deliberate certainty that gave her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She couldn't. This kiss was nothing like the first. The first had been a question, restrained and full of need. This was the answer. It was deep, and it was certain. His lips were firm, and he tilted his head, deepening the kiss, taking what she was offering and what she was not. It was not a rough kiss, but it was total. He was learning her. His free hand came to her waist, not to pull her closer, but just to hold her steady, to anchor her. Liana's hand, the one that was not bandaged, came up. Her fingers were trembling. She didn't push him away. She rested her palm flat against his chest, against the solid wall of muscle beneath his shirt. She could feel his heart, a heavy, steady thump that was faster than it should be. The beat of it, under her hand, was an admission of its own. He tasted of coffee in the storm. He was warm, a furnace against the cold of the apartment. She felt herself leaning into him, her fear being swallowed by a wave of sensation, a feeling of being seen. He broke the kiss slowly, resting his forehead against hers. They were both breathing hard, their breath mingling in the small space between them. Lana was shaking. He felt it. "You're cold," he whispered, without pulling away completely. He shrugged out of his heavy knit shirt, moving with an athletic grace. He was wearing a simple black t-shirt underneath, and she saw the defined lines of his shoulders and arms, the dark ink of a tattoo just visible on his bicep. He didn't pull her to him. He didn't touch her skin. He just took his shirt, still warm from his body, and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was heavy, smelling of him, that scent of spice and safety and danger. She clutched it, pulling it tighter, her fingers, still on his chest, splayed open. He sat back, pulling her with him until her back was against the couch and he was sitting beside her, their legs almost touching. They said nothing. The power was still out. The rain was still falling. They fell asleep like that, on her worn-out couch, surrounded by candlelight. She was wrapped in his shirt, and he was a solid, watchful presence in the dark. They were fully clothed, but Liana had never felt so emotionally bare in her life. The next morning, she woke up, and he was gone. The apartment was clean. The candles were gone, the food containers were gone. The only sign he had been there was the heavy black shirt, which was still draped over her, and a new, dead-bolted lock on her apartment door. She went to the hospital in a daze, clutching his shirt, now folded in her bag, like a talisman. Her world was tilted. She had spent the night with Luciano Barone, and she had woken up, safe. When she got to the 11th floor, she saw him. He was standing outside Sophia's room, his back to her, in one of his sharp suits. He looked like the boss again, a wave of something. Affection, gratitude, confusion washed over her. She started to walk toward him. Then she saw the nurse inside Sophia's room. It wasn't one of the rotating staff. It was a new woman, older with a severe face, who was checking Sophia's charts. "Oh, Liana, honey," Martha, the charge nurse, said, catching her at the desk. "You didn't get the memo?" "What memo?" Liana asked, her stomach twisting. "You've been reassigned. Day shift, pediatrics, effective immediately." "What? Why?" Liana's blood ran cold. Who ordered it?" "The director, honey," Martha said, lowering her voice. "Came down this morning, said you were a distraction to the VIPs on this floor. I'm sorry." A distraction. He had spent the night with her, bared his soul, and then he had fired her. He had moved her. He had controlled her, just as she had feared. The warmth of the night vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp fury. She didn't hear the rest of what Martha said. She saw Luciano turn, his face softening when he saw her. He had been waiting for her. She stalked past him. She didn't go to pediatrics. She went to the administrative wing. She was going to find the director. She heard Luciano's voice, low and urgent, behind her. "Liana, wait." She was halfway down the hall when she heard a different sound, a commotion. Luciano had just seen the new nurse. He had read the memo, and he was no longer calm. "Where is Director Thompson?" She heard him snap at Martha. His office, Mr. Barone, but he's in a board meeting." Luciano was already moving. He strode down the hall, his long legs eating up the distance, not toward Liana, but toward the boardroom. Liana, stunned, followed him. He didn't knock. He threw the boardroom doors open. Liana stopped in the hallway, her heart pounding, and listened. "Get out," Luciano's voice said. It was not a shout. It was a low, Arctic command. "Excuse me, Mr. Barone, this is a private—" Director Thompson began. "It is not all of you," he said to the board members. "Out, now." There was a scramble of chairs, a flurry of, "I beg your pardons," and 4 men in suits hurried out of the room, their faces pale. Liana hid in an alcove. The doors closed, leaving Luciano alone with the director. "Do you know who I am?" Luciano said, his voice quiet. "Of course. Mr. Barone, we are so grateful for your—" "Patronage. My patronage," Luciano repeated. "My patronage, which is the only thing keeping this hospital from being sold for parts. My patronage, which is currently paying the salary of every single person in this building, including you." "Yes, sir." "Then you will explain to me," Luciano said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "Why the only person in this entire hospital who has done my sister any good was just reassigned to the one floor I am not on. It was a complaint," the director stammered. An anonymous complaint about improper familiarity." "A complaint," Luciano said. "I see. And you didn't think to run that by me, the man who owns your debt." He paused. "I will be here in 5 minutes. When I am, you will have Nurse Carter's reassignment reversed. You will have her file cleared, and you will find whoever made that complaint, and you will fire them. If she is not back on the 11th floor by the time I return, I will pull my sister and my funding, and I will enjoy reading about your bankruptcy. Am I clear?" "Crystal. Mr. Barone." Luciano pulled the door open and stormed out, his face a mask of thunder. He saw Liana standing in the alcove, her face white. She felt 2 things at once: a dizzying, flattering sense of awe that this man would tear down a hospital for her, and a profound, bone-deep terror that he would— She stepped out, blocking his path. "That is what you do?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "You just burn things. You just threaten and buy and control. I am handling it," he growled. "No, this is not handling it. This is monstrous," she cried, the words tumbling out. "You can't do this, Luciano. You can't protect me by controlling everything. That is not love. That is ownership. I can't fall in love with a man who thinks I am just another one of his possessions." The words "fall in love" hung in the sterile air between them, shocking them both into silence. Liana's hand flew to her mouth. She hadn't meant to say it. Luciano stopped. His whole body went still. The fury in his eyes vanished, replaced by a raw, profound shock. He looked shaken. He stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. He had used his power, the only tool he had ever known, and it was the one thing that was costing him. "Liana," he said. His voice wrecked. "Don't," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't. I have to go." "No," he said, reaching for her, but not touching her. "Don't go. Please. Forget him. Forget what I did. Just my sister." He looked genuinely desperate, all the power stripped away. "Please, don't do it for me. Do it for her. Just sing for her. One more time. Please." His please was her undoing. The mafia boss was gone. This was the grieving brother. She wiped her eyes, her anger collapsing into weary empathy. She nodded. They walked back to the room. The new nurse was gone. Liana sat by Sophia's bed, Luciano standing in his usual spot by the window, the tension between them a living thing. Liana took a breath, She sang the lullaby, her voice thick with unshed tears, but it was clear and soft. She sang of peace. She sang of waking. She finished the song. Nothing. Just the beep of the monitors. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and then it happened. Sophia's hand, the one nearest to Liana, twitched. Her fingers curled, just slightly. "Did you see that?" Luciano was at the bedside in an instant. Her hand. She moved her hand. Liana looked. Sophia's eyelids fluttered. A small, almost inaudible sigh escaped her lips. She was still in the coma. She didn't wake up, but it was more. It was a crack in the ice. Luciano looked at Liana, his face a mask of such profound, tearful gratitude that it broke her heart. That night, Liana went home, her mind reeling from the whiplash, the fight, the admission of love, the twitch. She walked into her building, her mind 1,000 miles away. The 2 guards Luciano had posted in the lobby nodded to her. She nodded back. She got to her apartment. The new lock was solid. She felt, for the first time, safe. When she opened the door, she saw it. An envelope had been slipped under the door, bypassing the guards. It was a simple, white envelope. Her name was not on it. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. It was heavy. She tore it open. It was not a note. It was a photograph, a high-quality, color photograph. It was a picture of her aunt. She was in her new room at the Silver Crest, sitting in her wheelchair, smiling at a nurse. She looked happy. She looked safe. But someone had taken a thick red marker and drawn a perfect round target directly over her aunt's smiling face. The photograph fell from Liana's numb fingers. It spun, a flash of white and red, landing face up on her worn rug. The target, drawn in a thick, angry red circle, seemed to pulse. Her aunt, safe, happy, and marked. This was not Adam. Adam was a bully, a creature of impulse and ego. This was cold. This was professional. This was a monster she could not have comprehended. A monster who had slipped past Luciano's guards. She backed away from the door, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This was his world, the one he had tried to explain in the rain, the world of men who saw love as a liability, a target you paint on someone's back. He had painted a target on her, and now they had found her aunt. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so violently she could barely unlock it. She didn't have his number. She had nothing. She was going to the hospital. She had to warn him. She grabbed her keys, yanked open the new heavy-duty lock, and ran into the hallway. The 2 guards in the lobby, his men, looked up, startled, as she sprinted toward the door. "Ma'am, you're not cleared to—" One of them started, stepping in her path. "I have to see him," she cried, her voice hysterical. "It's my aunt. They sent a picture." "A picture?" The first guard's face went hard. He reached for his radio. "Marco, lock down the street. The lady's spooked." He turned to her, his voice suddenly calm. "Okay, miss, we'll take you. You're safer with us." "No, I need—" "Liana?" She froze. The voice came from the stairwell. It was not Luciano. It was not one of his men. It was Adam. He stepped out of the shadows, his handsome face marred by a grin. He wore a clean, expensive-looking suit. His arm was in a pristine black sling. "Fancy seeing you here, little bird," he said. The 2 guards went for their weapons, a blur of dark suits and steel. "Get back!" one yelled at her. "Oh, I don't think so," Adam said, and he clicked a small remote in his good hand. The lobby's fire alarm shrieked, a deafening, high-pitched wail. In the same instant, the front glass doors shattered inward, not from a bullet, but from 2 men in heavy tactical gear. It was a professional operation. Flashbang grenades. Liana screamed and covered her ears as a blinding white light and a concussive boom filled the small lobby. The guards were disoriented, blinded. The men were on them in a second. It wasn't a gunfight. It was a silent, brutal, efficient takedown. Liana was pressed against the wall, her eyes streaming, her ears ringing. The world was smoke and screaming alarms. Adam walked toward her, untouched, his smile gone. "You see, Liana, I found some new friends, the Romanos. They're very interested in you. Turns out, you're the one thing Luciano Barone can't live without. And that makes you very, very valuable. Please, she wept, sliding down the wall. Please, Adam, you should have just stayed gone. He sneered. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in. Now you get to see what happens to a man's possessions when he isn't careful. He dragged her out through the shattered glass into a black van that had materialized at the curb. The entire event took less than 15 seconds. Luciano was in Sophia's room, watching the steady, slow line on her EEG. When his phone vibrated, it was not a call. It was a text. Compromised. Carter won. It was the code from his lobby team. He was on his feet before the second text arrived. Ambush. Multiple hostiles. Carter taken. We are down. Luciano Barone stood very still. The numbness that had defined his grief for 2 months did not return. The grief that had softened him when Liana sang did not return. What returned was the monster. He turned and looked at his sister, her face peaceful. He had failed her, and now, because of him, he had failed Liana. He had put the target on her back. He walked out of the room, his face a mask of such cold, primal fury that Martha, the charge nurse, physically recoiled. "Mr. Barone?" He didn't answer. He was on the phone as he strode to the elevator, his voice a low, lethal command. "Nico, she's gone. They took her from the building. Boss, How? Now," Luciano interrupted. "Bring me the guards from the lobby detail, the ones who let this happen. They're not dead, but they're critical. Then bring me the man I was paying to watch the street, the one who saw nothing. Bring him to the tannery, and find me a Romano. I don't care which one. Find me one now." He hung up. The man who had sat by his sister's bed was gone. The boss had taken his place. For the next 12 hours, the city's underworld burned. Luciano Barone, a man who had been in mourning, a sleeping giant, was now awake. And he was incandescent with rage. He did not just interrogate the men his team brought him, he dismantled them. He ripped through the Romano cartel's network with a singular, terrifying focus. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He just consumed. He burned 2 safe houses to the ground, not to get information, but as a message. I am coming. He found the link at 4 a.m, a low-level dealer, weeping. His face a ruin gave him a name, Adam, an ex-boyfriend, a musician who had been boasting for a week about the score of a lifetime, about how he was going to get back at the nurse who had wronged him. Adam, Luciano whispered, and the name on his lips was a death sentence. He got the location, an abandoned shipping warehouse on the waterfront, a property the Romanos used for smuggling. Liana was in the dark, a real, profound dark. The kind that ate the light. It smelled of rust and salt water. Her hands were tied behind her back, her ankles bound. The rope was new and tight. It bit into her wrists. She was emotionally devastated, but the terror was so great it had looped back around on itself, leaving a cold, hard knot of defiance. She would not cry. She would not scream. She had survived Adam once. It's a long way from the conservatory, isn't it, little bird? Adam's voice came from the corner. A light flicked on, a single, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. He was sitting on a chair, sipping from a flask. His sling was gone. He'd been faking the injury's severity. "Why, Adam?" she asked, her voice a hoarse croak. "Why?" He laughed. "Because he broke my shoulder. Because he took you. Because you looked at him. With that same look you used to give me. Like he was a god. You're mine. Liana, you always were. And these Romano guys, they're just renting you. They want Barone, but I get to be the one to return his damaged goods. He will find me," she said, the words a prayer. "Oh, I'm counting on it," Adam said. "That's the plan. He comes for you. He walks into a room with 6 of Romano's best, and I get to watch." A door slammed open somewhere in the warehouse. "Showtime," Adam grinned. He pulled out a pistol and stood up. "Let's go see the fireworks." He grabbed her by the arm and dragged her out of the room, into a vast, cavernous space filled with shipping containers. Luciano did not enter with a team. He entered alone, from the water, a ghost in the dark. He had been in this warehouse before. He owned the one next to it. He moved through the shadows, a silence his enemies, who were waiting for a frontal assault, could not comprehend. He took out the first 2 guards on the catwalks with a silenced pistol. 2 shots, 2 soft thuds. The third, he took with a knife. It was a close, personal, silent act of violence. He held the man, his hand over his mouth, until he stopped moving. He saw her. She was across the cavern, tied to a metal support pillar. Adam was standing in front of her, his gun to her head, screaming for Luciano to show himself. "Come on, Barone! I know you're in here. Come and get your property!" Luciano stepped out of the shadow. He was 50 yards away. He held his hands up, his pistol on the ground. "Adam," he said, his voice calm, echoing in the vast space. "Let her go. Not a chance." Adam sneered. "You're going to watch. My new friends are—" Adam was interrupted by a series of muffled shots from outside the warehouse. His new friends, the Romano men, were being engaged by Luciano's team. Adam had been played. This was not the main event. This was a diversion. Adam's face went from smug to terrified. You bastard," he shrieked, pressing the gun harder to Liana's head. "I'll kill her. I'll kill her right now." "Yes, you will," Luciano said, walking forward slowly. "You'll pull that trigger, and you will have signed your own death warrant. You will die. That is a certainty. The only question is how." He kept walking. "But you can live. Let her go. Walk away. I'll even give you a head start." You're lying." Adam was trembling. "I have never lied to a man I was about to kill," Luciano said, his voice dropping. "But for her, I'm making an exception. Let her go. Adam." He was 20 feet away. Liana, her eyes wide with terror, was looking at him. She was mouthing his name, Luciano. Adam saw the devotion in her eyes, and he snapped. "If I can't have her, no one can." He turned the gun, not on Liana, on Luciano. He fired. The shot was deafening. Luciano did not dive. He moved, a blur to the left. The bullet sparked on the concrete where he had been. Before Adam could fire again, Luciano had crossed the distance. It was not a fight. It was an execution. Luciano's hand clamped on Adam's gun wrist, shattering it against the pillar. Adam screamed. Luciano's other hand, holding the knife he'd used on the guard, moved once, a short, brutal arc. Adam gurgled, his eyes wide with surprise. He slid to the ground, his pistol clattering. Luciano didn't look at him. He was already at Liana, his knife cutting the ropes on her wrists. He was bloodied, not from the fight, but from his work. A splash of an enemy's blood was on his cheek. "Liana," he said, his voice thick. She fell into him, her legs giving out. He caught her, his arms wrapping around her, crushing her to him. He was shaking. The monster was gone. The grieving man was back. He buried his face in her hair, his body trembling. "I've got you," he whispered over and over. "I've got you. You're safe." He carried her out. He walked right past the firefight his men were now winning. He didn't look back. He just walked into the pre-dawn light, holding her, whispering her name as if it were the only word he knew. She woke up to the smell of lavender and old wood. The sheets were not the sterile, starched cotton of the hospital. They were impossibly soft, heavy linen. The room was vast, with a carved wooden ceiling and a fireplace. She was in a bed that could have held 4 people. She was clean. Someone had changed her out of her clothes and into a soft silk nightgown. Her wrists were bandaged. Luciano was sitting in a chair by the bed. He was not asleep. He was watching her. He was clean, too, wearing a fresh gray t-shirt and dark pants. But he looked hollowed out, exhausted. "Where?" she whispered. Her throat was raw. "My home. The family estate. Not the penthouse. You're safe here. Truly safe." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "How do you feel?" She looked at her bandaged hands. He will never touch you again," Luciano said. His voice was flat, final. The relief was so profound. She began to cry. Not the hysterical sobs of the night before, just silent, weary tears that rolled down her temples. Luciano moved from the chair to the bed, sitting on the edge. He didn't touch her. He just sat there, his guilt a palpable thing. "Liana," he said, his voice rough. "What they did, what he did, it was my fault. I put you in danger. I brought my world, to your door. You came for me." She wept. "I almost lost you," he said, and his voice broke. He looked at his hands, then at her. "For the last 20 years, I have lived for one reason, to protect my family, to protect my sister. It was my penance, my only purpose." He looked at her, and his eyes were raw with a confession that went deeper than the one in the hospital. "When they took you, I realized I was not living for my sister. I was just existing in the dark. I never knew what I was living for. Not really. Not until I almost lost you." His words settled over her, more intimate than any touch. She reached out, her bandaged, trembling hand, and she did what she had wanted to do in the rain. She touched his face. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, the stubble, the exhaustion. He was real. He was here. He had come for her. "You scare me. Luciano," she whispered, her tears wetting her fingers. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I know." "No," she said. You don't scare me because you're violent. You don't scare me because of that." She nodded to the door, to the world he commanded. "You scare me because I trust you. I've never trusted anyone. Not really, and I trust you." His eyes opened. He looked shattered by her words. He leaned in, and he kissed her forehead. It was a kiss of reverence, of apology, of pure, unadulterated relief. Then, slowly, he lowered his mouth to hers. He kissed her lips. It was not the desperate kiss of the hospital or the slow burn of the rainstorm. This was a promise. It was salt and tears and a shared, ragged breath. It was a kiss that said, "We survived." She put her arms around his neck, and he gently, so gently, pulled her into his arms, lying down on the bed beside her. On top of the covers, he didn't undress her. He just held her. They lay there, silently, trembling together, their bodies pressed close. As the sun began to rise, his phone, on the bedside table, buzzed once. He ignored it. It buzzed again. "It might be your sister," Liana murmured against his chest. With a heavy sigh, he reached for it. He read the text. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "It's from Dr. Weiss," he said, his voice thick. "Sophia's vitals. They've stabilized. He says her brain activity is stronger than it's ever been. He says he's hopeful." Liana looked up at him. The man who had torn the city apart. The man who was now holding her as if she were made of glass. "She's waiting for you," Liana said. "And she's waiting for you to be okay." Luciano looked down at her, and he knew, in that moment, what he had to do. He couldn't just have one foot in the light. He couldn't just protect Liana. He had to deserve her. "I'm giving it up," he said. The words, spoken aloud, were a vow. What? The life, the business, the violence. It's over. He held her tighter. "I will not be the man who put a target on your back. I will not be that man for Sophia, or for you." It had been 3 weeks since the warehouse, 3 weeks since the fire, the blood, and the rescue. Liana's world was no longer defined by the gray, sterile walls of a hospital or the peeling paint of her tiny apartment. She was living at Luciano's estate, a vast, quiet property of old trees and stone, where the only sounds were the wind and the distant, muffled calls of his security team, who were now her protectors, not her jailers. Her bruises had faded to pale yellow shadows. The rope burns on her wrists were healing, thin pink lines that he kissed every morning before he left for meetings that she knew were about dismantling, not building, his old life. He had asked her to go back to the hospital just one more time. "She's stable," he had told her, his voice rough with a hope he was terrified to embrace. "The doctor. He said her activity is highest in the evenings, when you used to sing." So she went. She did not go as a nurse. She wore a simple, soft green dress, her hair down. She was not an employee or a stimulus. She was Liana. The 11th floor hallway was the same, but she was different. She was not afraid. She walked past the nurse's station, gave a small, kind smile to Martha, and pushed open the door to suite 304. She had asked to go in alone. Luciano, after a moment of intense, possessive hesitation, had agreed. He was downstairs, in the lobby, giving her the space she needed. Liana sat in the chair by the bed. She looked at Sophia, her heart aching with a complex mix of empathy and gratitude. This sleeping girl was the reason her own life had been saved. "Hi, Sophia," Liana whispered, taking her hand. It was warmer than she expected. "It's Liana, your brother. He's waiting for you. We're all waiting for you." She took a breath, not of anxiety, but of purpose. She closed her eyes and began to sing. It was the Italian lullaby, Ninna Nana, Ninna O. Her voice was not the broken, whispered thing it had been. It was not a habit born of fear. It was full, clear, and resonant. It was the voice she'd had at the conservatory, before Adam. It was a voice filled with love, pain, and a fierce, burning hope. She sang of stars and slumber, but this time, she sang of waking. The door to the suite opened. Liana's voice faltered for a second, but she did not stop. She saw him in her periphery. Luciano had not been able to stay away. He had come up the elevator, needing to be near, and had heard her from the hallway. He had pushed the door open, needing to see. He stood, frozen. He saw the woman he loved, a vision in green, her hand holding his sister's. He saw his sister, her face peaceful. And he heard the voice that had cracked his grief, the voice that had woken his soul. It was too much. The culmination of 20 years of guilt, the agonizing hope of the last 3 months, the terror of the warehouse, and the profound, staggering love he felt for the woman in the chair. It all hit him at once. His armor, the granite mask he had worn since he was 19, did not just crack, it shattered. His knees buckled. He fell, not in a polite kneel, but a complete, broken surrender. His hands catching himself on the foot of the hospital bed, his shoulders, the ones that had carried the weight of a criminal empire, began to shake. Liana's voice washed over him, and he bowed his head. Overcome. "That voice," he whispered, the words a ragged prayer, lost to the room. "That voice. Luke." The sound was not from Luciano. It was not from Liana. It was a dry, rasping croak. Liana's song stopped, cut off in a sharp gasp. Her hand flew to her mouth. Luciano's head snapped up. His eyes were wide, his face wrecked with a desperate, impossible hope. Sophia's eyes, they were open, they were not fluttering, they were not vacant, they were open, hazy with confusion, and fixed on his face. "Luke," she whispered again. Her throat was raw from disuse. Her fingers, the ones Liana was holding, twitched. For a second, the world stopped. Luciano, Liana, Sophia, they were the only 3 people on Earth. Then Luciano moved. He was not the boss. He was not a monster. He was a brother. He scrambled from his knees, lunging for the side of the bed, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch. "Sophia? Sophia." "Oh my God. Sophia." His voice broke on her name. "Luke, oh, hurts," she murmured, her gaze trying to focus. I know, it's okay. You're okay." He choked out, finally, gently, taking her other hand. "You're okay. I'm here." Liana, her body trembling with shock and joy, slammed the nurse's call button, her tears blurring the room. "She's awake." She wept, her voice high. "She's awake. Oh, God, she's awake." The room was suddenly full. Doctors, nurses, Dr. Weiss, his face a mask of disbelief. Lights were on, questions were being asked, vitals were being shouted. Luciano was pushed back, away from the bed. As the medical team swarmed, he just stared, his hand over his mouth, his eyes locked on his sister's face. It was too much. The noise, the lights, the sheer, crushing relief. He was suffocating. He turned, stumbled past Liana, and pushed his way out of the room, into the hallway. He made it 10 feet before he had to stop, leaning his back against the wall. the same wall he had stood against when he first heard her. He slid down, his legs giving out, until he was sitting on the polished floor, his head in his hands. He did not make a sound. He just wept, the silent, racking sobs of a man who had been holding his breath for 20 years. He heard soft footsteps. He didn't look up. Liana didn't say his name. She didn't ask if he was all right. She understood. She simply sat down on the floor beside him, her small body against his, and put her arms around his waist, holding him from behind. She pressed her cheek to the back of his suit jacket and held on, anchoring him to the world. He flinched at the touch, a reflex, then melted into it. He covered her hands with his own, his grip iron tight. They sat there, on the floor of the 11th floor corridor, for a long time. Finally, he stirred. He turned his body, his movements slow, and pulled her from his back into his arms. This was not the desperate, trembling embrace after the rescue. This was a full, complete, and total embrace. He held her with a strength that was absolute, his face buried in her hair, and she held him back. Her arms locked around his neck. There was no hesitation. There was no fear. The walls were gone. A man in a suit. Nico approached, his face urgent, then stopped, unsure. "Boss?" Luciano lifted his head, but he did not let Liana go. "What is it, Nico?" The Romano family," Nico said, keeping his voice low. "They're in disarray. They're asking for terms." Luciano looked down at Liana, at her face tucked into his neck. He saw the faint, fading line on her wrist. He thought of Sophia, just rooms away, her eyes open. He looked at Nico, his voice clear, calm and final. "The terms are simple. It's over. I'm retiring." Nico's jaw dropped. "Boss? You're in charge now, Nico," Luciano said. "You're smart. You're stable. The old ways. They end today. We have enough money. We have enough. Everything. From now on, we build. We don't break. Am I clear?" Liana pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes wide. He was not the man who had torn down the boardroom. He was not the man who had burned a warehouse. He was just Luke building, he said, smiling at her. A real, small smile, not breaking. 6 months later, a small, glass-fronted office opened in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. The sign on the door, etched in simple, elegant script, read, "The Liana Carter Clinic for Music Therapy." Inside, Liana was sitting on a small rug, across from a young woman who was staring at the floor, her hands clenched. Liana was not singing. She was just humming, a low, resonant note, and slowly, the woman's shoulders began to relax, through the glass. Luciano sat in the waiting room. He was not in a suit. He wore a soft, gray cashmere sweater and dark jeans. He was reading a newspaper, a different section of it, one that talked about real estate development. He had bought 3 failing properties in the Bronx and was turning them into community centers. He looked up, as if he could feel her gaze, and he met her eyes through the glass. He didn't just smile, he beamed, a look of such profound, quiet pride that Liana's heart swelled. That autumn, the family estate was no longer a fortress of shadows. It was a home. The long, dark dining table was filled with light and with people. Sophia was there. Her hair was cut short, marking her new beginning, and she was laughing, a bright, loud sound that filled the room. She was arguing with Nico about a football game. Liana sat beside Luciano. She was watching Sophia, her own face bright with a joy she had never thought possible. She laughed, a deep, easy sound, as Sophia stole a piece of bread from Luciano's plate. Luciano wasn't watching his sister. He was watching Liana. He watched the way the firelight caught the warmth in her hair, the way she smiled without holding back, the way she moved through the world with a confidence that he had helped her reclaim. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur, meant only for her. Liana turned, her smile softening. "What is it?" He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles, over the skin that had once been so raw. "I didn't know peace," he murmured, his voice rough with an emotion he no longer hid. "Not in my entire life. I thought it was Silence. But I was wrong. I didn't know what it felt like. Not until you sang to me. Liana's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. She didn't need to speak. She just turned her hand in his, lacing her fingers with his. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of need, or of desperation, or of passion. It was a kiss of promise. It was gentle. It was final. It was a new life. Just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed it. This is a passionate community, and I would love to know where you are listening from. Please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more, and I would love to hear your thoughts on Luciano and Liana's journey, so please share them in English.